I have recently become obsessed with tracking my reading. I mean, I've always tracked my reading using my Goodreads, but this past year, I had a spreadsheet, a Notion, I had Goodreads, I had Storygraph, I had Fable, I have a paper reading journal. I have so many different ways that I am keeping track of my reading. It's a little bit of its own hobby, I think. But I wanted to take a little bit of time today and go through the statistics that I track specifically in my spreadsheet. The statistics that I'm going to show you are from my Google Sheet. It's one that I purchased off of Etsy. I buy a new one every year. I've already bought the one for 2025. Could I make my own? Yes. Do I want to make my own when I have to work with spreadsheets at work? Not really. So I'm choosing to support someone else who's put in that work for me, and I will link that down in the comments so that you can go ahead and check her out. And if you want to purchase one, that you can purchase one. So we are just going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to begin with kind of an overview of my statistics for the year. So as you can see, I read 131 books in the year 2024, and that's kind of accurate, although I do think that this is probably counting a few books that I counted as DNFs on Goodreads, which is why my Goodreads total was a little bit lower. I think my Goodreads total was 124. I read 46,577 pages in the year 2024. And I did not track words read. This year, I'm actually going to be tracking words. I've already added that to my spreadsheet so that I can keep track of that. And at the end of the year, I'm going to have a completely enormous and possibly useless number to look at. So let's look over here at my monthly books. And you can see that I read the most books this year in October, which is not surprising because October is spooky month and I love spooky books, but I generally only read them in the fall. So I was trying to get through everything that was on my list. So I read 15 books in October. Next highest was August with 14. And then my lowest month was July with 8. And that makes sense because July is my birthday month and it's also the middle of the summer. And I think we had a lot of stuff going on and I never read quite as much in the summer as I do in the fall and the winter. But it looks like I generally, and this is useful for planning my TBRs, it looks like I generally am going to be able to say that I read about 10-ish books a month, and that's a pretty safe number. And sometimes I read more. And occasionally I read a little bit less, but 10's pretty safe. And that's usually what I say. Moving on, we're going to look at my ratings. So as you can see, I am a relatively easy rater. And I think a lot of that is because, first of all, at this point in my life, I have a pretty good idea of what kinds of things I like to read. So I don't tend to pick up things that I just think I'm going to hate. And also, I DNF. If a book is not working for me, there is no shame in putting that thing down. I DNF'd more books than this spreadsheet is going to say that I did. It does have a number in here somewhere, but definitely I DNF'd more books than that because if I'm not enjoying it, if I've gotten to 100 pages and I'm not having a good time, well, I have a lot of other things that I could be doing with my time than reading a book that I'm not enjoying, so I will generally DNF. It's a little bit less lopsided, I think, than it looks because this chart does split out by half stars, so actually my 4.5 stars are more than my 5-star, but still 34 5-star reads is not something that I am going to complain about, and only 2 1-star reads and 1.5. So I didn't read a lot of stuff all the way to the end that I absolutely hated. And there's a fair amount in the middle, but I'm feeling pretty good about that distribution just because it means that I am not picking up a lot of books that I'm not enjoying. And that's what I want to see in my reading. Moving on to this next one, we have genres. So as you can see, I'm a fantasy girl. I read 55 fantasy books, and that's not including the books in this list that I probably would have listed as secondary fantasy. Like that would have been the second category because I do track that, but I didn't bother putting it in here. So 55 or 42% of the reads that I read this year were fantasy books. My second highest number is science fiction. No surprise there, was 21. And then after that, horror at 17 actually is a little bit of a surprise. I have not always read a lot of horror, but I guess I did this year. So I read 17, then 12 romance, and then we get into 7 literary fiction and 5 mystery. So you can see why literary fiction and mystery were the 2 genres that I listed as goals this year, that I really want to read more of those, as well as trying to read more science fiction because I do love fantasy, but I mean, I consider myself a science fiction fan more than a fantasy fan. I don't know if that's actually accurate for the way that I read anymore, But that's what I've always thought of myself as. Science fiction's where I got started into reading. So I'm definitely trying to work on reading more of all those genres this year. Okay, now let's look at the format that I read. First, you can see that I only read 2% of my books were nonfiction this year. I really didn't read any nonfiction, and I would like to say that I'm going to fix that. I did set a goal that I want to read 6 nonfiction books this year, and I'm hoping to be able to reach that goal, but I just don't reach for nonfiction. I think a lot of it is that the reason I read is to escape from things. I read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and I read it as a way to go to another place. And nonfiction is a lot more about, staying and really examining the reality, at least the kinds of nonfiction that I read. And this has just not been the time that I wanted to do that. And maybe this year I'm going to feel like it. But yeah, 3 nonfiction books and one of them I didn't even like. So that's what I read last year. Going on to format read, you can see I mostly read novels, 87% novels, and most of the ones that weren't a novel were a novella. I read more novellas this year than I think I have ever read. It's something I didn't think that I liked, but I have discovered that for speculative fiction especially, I do really enjoy a novella. And then I read 4 graphic novels and 1 manga. And I did read 1 short story collection, which isn't tracked in there, but that's, again, something that I traditionally have not read a lot of, so trying to diversify a little bit there. Okay, moving on to source, I read 90 of my books, or 69%, in ebook. So, and that's actually probably a little bit misleading in some ways. I mean, I probably actually read almost all of these books in ebook form. It is rare that I will read a book only in physical form. Usually if I'm reading a book in physical form, I also get the ebook from the library if it's available, because I don't want to carry a physical book with me. And I'm a big fan of kind of mixing it up. If it says audiobook, I probably also read that as an ebook, because I was probably doing them at the same time. I mean, I like to mix them up. So the ones that say mixture, I think I just got tired of marking that and just started marking whatever it is that I primarily read it in. But yeah, I'm a big ebook fan. I love my Kindle. I have a Kindle Paperwhite Signature. I think it's the 2022 version, whatever one that is. I don't know which generation that is. The last generation, not the current one. And I love it. Okay. Looking here at author and publication, you can see that I read a good mix of new to me and returning authors. 56 new to me, 55 read before. I think that's pretty good. I'm reading a lot of people that I haven't read before, and that's what I want to see in my reading, is that I'm not getting stuck in a rut and only reading the same authors. And then over here, I read 122 traditionally published books, and then indie and self-published split the others that I tracked that on. I would like to read more indie and self-published books, but I struggle because there are so many, finding the ones that are really good. So I really depend on seeing reviews of things from people that I trust and deciding that that's something I might want to read. I also, because I do read so many library books, it is more difficult to get a library book that's indie or self-published. The library does not always have them. I do request books for my library to add to their collection on a pretty regular basis, so I will try to do that if it's something that's available. But if it's something that is, for instance, only available on Kindle Unlimited, I might not have gotten to it. I might not have read it. I would love suggestions, though, for independently published books that you think I would like, because I would really like to support those authors that are doing it for themselves, and I just don't know how to find them. So any suggestions are completely welcome. And this page is just more stats that I had. So I have, you can see that I read 109 adult books and 18 young adult books. I read a lot more adult than young adult. It's just where I am in my life now. I don't feel like young adult books are speaking to me the way that they probably used to, 15 years ago. And then I read 2 middle grade, 1 children's. Those aren't really things that I read unless it's a special occasion or somebody really recommends a book highly to me, and then I'll pick that up. I didn't read any new adult books. I don't even know what that is. I mean, I know what it is, but I feel like new adult is a category that should be used if it's going to be used to describe the age of the characters and the age that it's aimed at. But I feel like it's more just like things that would have been young adult, but they're spicy. And I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't understand the category new adult. So there may have been some books I read that actually were categorized as new adult, and I just didn't realize it because it wouldn't occur to me. So let's move on over to published year. I read 55 books that were published in 2024. So 55 new releases. And I read 24 books that were published in 2023. So that's a good chunk of my reading for the year. I am somebody who really, really loves to keep up with a new release. I stalk the new releases. I know the books that are coming out that I want to read. I do read a fair amount of ARCs from the publisher, so that also is something that's contributing to that, but I just like to keep up. I like to read the new stuff. It's not about, content or the channel or anything like that. It's just I like to read new books. But having said that, I do need to do a better job of making sure that I'm reading the backlist titles that I've never gotten to. So hopefully this year, this is going to look a little bit more, diverse. It's not just going to be all books that were published in the last 2 years, but I'm not making any guarantees because I read what I like. And a lot of times what I like is new stuff. So that's all right. Okay, going over here to where I got my books from, you can see I got 94 of my books from the library. And that's not surprising. That's my channel name, right? Jessica's Library Card. I use my library constantly. I go probably at least every 2 weeks. I will go to the library and pick up new books. When I do my TBR, if I don't own the book, I will go to the library immediately and pick it up. And almost everything, as I said before, that I don't read from the library, I'm getting as an ebook from the library so that I can switch back and forth between different formats. Looks like I did 8 ARCs from NetGalley, and that's enjoyable. I enjoyed that. Only 6 books from Kindle Unlimited. So Kindle Unlimited is not a good deal for me. I usually only have it when they've offered me a cheap deal. If I think it's $12 a month, that would not be worth it for me. I do not read enough books from Kindle Unlimited, especially because I use my library. Most books are available from the library, except for the ones that are Kindle Unlimited exclusives. And most of those are they're not always things I'm interested in. It just depends. But there are some. There are some that I have wanted to read that I could only get from Kindle, which is why I have had it 3 times this year. But it's not my primary thing. And 14 books that I bought from the bookstore. That's also misleading because if I read a book and I love it, I will then go and buy the book. But I didn't originally read them from buying them at the bookstore. I bought them after I read them at the library, and now they live on all these shelves behind me. Okay, let's look at my diversity list here. Okay, so I do want to make sure that I am not just reading books that were written by authors who are exactly like me. And so to that end, I track the category diverse, and diverse is whatever I want it to be. It's talking about the author though, something about the author. And then I have a little box where I can write in, what I actually mean when I say diverse about this author. But 28 out of my books were diverse authors, and then 46 had LGBTQIA plus characters or themes. 17 were own voices. That's always a hard one to know whether somebody's writing from their own experience or not. I don't always know, but if I know, I write it down. And so somehow my spreadsheet has calculated that I read 21% diverse. I don't know exactly. I think that's just the first category, is 21% of my books. But I'm fairly happy with that. I feel like that's not bad. And then moving on over here, this is bad. This is the country that the author is from. And as you can see, I only read 2 books, one from Japan, one from Norway, that were from a country that is not primarily English speaking, which means that I only read 2 books that were written in translation. I would really like to read more books that were translated. I mean, I do read books that are about other places, set other places, sometimes by an author whose heritage is from that, but I'm not reading books that were translated from other languages. And I think I just have a fear that I'm not going to like the translation, and maybe that's ridiculous. I do want to try to do a better job and try to get this number up a little bit this year. I don't know. I'm still not going to probably, be reading 50 books that were translated, but if I could do 5 would be more. 5 would be good. So we're going to see this year if I can make that happen. And then this is my last chart, and this is just the color of the covers that I read. So I just picked the predominant color, and you can see it's more than 50% black and blue. And that's because I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but fantasy and sci-fi books really like to be one of those 2 colors. They are almost always, like, I can line them all up in my shelves back here, and they're going to be all the black spines together, and they're all going to be fantasy books. So yeah. All right, I hope this was something that you found helpful or interesting. As I said, I will link my spreadsheet down below so that you can purchase one for yourself. It was not created by me, as I said, but if you're interested, I have been using this for 2 years now and I really enjoy it, and she added some nice things to it this year. Please leave me a comment and let me know if you do anything like this to track your reading statistics, and if there was anything this year that you found surprising. And I hope that you all have a fantastic week. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.